Sony's PlayStation 5 has become the de facto target platform for AAA game development in the current generation. As the leading console in the market, visual targets and performance are typically tailored for that machine, then scaled accordingly to Xbox and PC, which makes this GPU very interesting. It's the Radeon RX 6700, not the 6700 XT, just the plain 6700. Wasn't exactly a major release for AMD, indeed, we were never sampled with one. I got this one second-hand off eBay. But still, what's caught the attention of so many is just how close the specifications for this piece of kit are compared to the PlayStation 5's GPU. In many respects, it's actually quite uncanny. So, interesting question here. Is this graphics card effectively a gateway to PS5 quality visuals and performance in the PC space? I had to take a look. I'm actually going to kick off with a comparison that highlights something else, the quality of the PC port itself. The Last of Us Part 1 is in much better shape than it was at launch, but even so, despite so many hardware similarities between the RX 6700 and the PlayStation 5 GPU, the console version blows it out of the water. Here I'm using the native 4K rendering mode on PS5, which caps to 40 FPS, and I've identified a cutscene that's always under that 40 FPS cap. VSync is odd with the console, off with the 6700. We're looking at 36.2 FPS on PS5 up against 27.9 FPS on the 6700. So the 6700 is theoretically around 10% faster, yet here the console version on matching settings, a customized version of the PC's high preset, is 30% faster. In this static scene here, the gap actually rises to a 43 percentage point advantage for the console. We actually need to use FSR2 on the quality setting to address the deficit, and this allows the 6700 to pull slightly ahead, but it's still unfathomable that we need to rely on upscaling to deliver what PlayStation is achieving with native resolution. One thing I do want to point out is that at console equivalent settings, the 10GB 6700 runs out of graphics memory. I had to turn down texture streaming from fastest to fast and environment textures down to medium to remove the stutter caused by lack of memory. So not quite the apples to apples test I wanted, but still a decent test of relative compute power. Looking at Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, we have an interesting situation here as the developers have spoken to us about their bespoke console optimizations, specifically with ray tracing. But more than that, owing to the game's dynamic resolution scaling, actually finding a point with consistent drops to PS5 performance is challenging. My colleague Tom Morgan helped me out though with this point, where we can safely assume that owing to the continual drop in performance, we are at DRS lower bounds. That's 720p reconstructing to 1440p with FSR2, something we can easily match on PC for the duration of this section. Here we find that the 6700 delivers a 10-point advantage over PlayStation 5. Now, there's no chance of finding similar drops to performance in the 30 FPS quality mode. It's solid. But what we're seeing here is that even with all of those confounding factors I discussed earlier, performance differentials can land pretty much where you would expect them to. Now, I've previously used this static shot in Alan Wake 2 to find a performance limitation on PS5's quality mode, but a bit more digging finds this more dynamic benchmark, and it can be measured on both quality and performance modes, where we have fully locked console settings on PC, verified by the developer. It's another 6% performance differential, but this time it's in favour of the PS5. Of course, we can run through this sequence again with the lower quality performance mode. Lower settings, lower resolution, higher frame rates. But this time it's the 6700 that takes point with a 10.8% lead. More resolution heavy workloads do seem to favour the PS5, while higher frame rates seem to favour the 6700. Interesting state of affairs for sure, and a couple more tests I did seem to highlight this. Okay, so Hitman 3 is an older game. It's always seemed absurdly performant on AMD hardware though, but in fairness, at 1800p it runs well on PS5, rarely dipping beneath 60 FPS. And again, we have the same console equivalent settings supplied by the developer. But we can find some scenarios where performance doesn't quite hit the target 60 FPS on PS5. Here, there's actually a 44 percentage point lead for the 6700, matched here in this Berlin Forest area. I'm wondering if this may be down to Infinity Cache or maybe AMD driver optimizations, or simply the fact it was an early console game on the PS5. Difficult to say really. Similar stuff happens here in Monster Hunter Rise, a relatively simple game ported over from Nintendo Switch. PS5 has both 4K and 2700p super sampling options, and with 120Hz output we can find the limits of both on the console. Also, it has an options menu just like PC, meaning we can literally match settings here, which is quite interesting. Still, 6700 outperforms PS5 by around 32%, and if we move up to that 2700p super sampling mode, effectively we're still 30% ahead on the 6700. Those may well be exceptions though, outliers, and it can veer in the opposite direction. It's rare to find performance dips in Cyberpunk 2077 in the 30 FPS RT mode on PS5, but this part of the market in the Phantom Liberty expansion definitely has issues, but not as many as the 6700, and this one is kind of baffling. We're going to come back to this one later with more data and analysis, but we're pretty confident in our settings match here, and we've done extra work on ensuring that the RT local shadows are like for like between PC and console. But even so, the PS5 is outperforming the 6700 by around 45%. I mean, Sony has its own RT graphics API, which I understand to be more efficient than Microsoft's DXR on PC. But even so, 45%, wow. However, the 60 FPS performance mode with no RT, interesting stuff here. It leans into dynamic resolution very heavily, so a matched test on PC, extremely challenging. Best I can do is to offer this fast-paced trip around the Cherry Blossom marketplace. Three-way comparison here, PS5 versus 6700 on match settings, including matched dynamic resolution settings on PC. And then finally at the end there, 6700 locked to its maximum 1800p reconstructed output, no DRS. So my gut feeling here is that something's up with the DRS scaler on the PS5, which seems slow to respond, but it seems to work as you'd expect on PC, where the 6700 locks to its target 60 FPS. But it's interesting to note that maxing resolution on the 6700 produces very similar results to the PS5. DRS issues aside, the point I'm trying to make here is that the RT bench is very, very odd indeed, but remove RT from the equation with the performance mode, and we're back to the 6700 working very similarly to the PlayStation 5. That big console advantage gone. So interesting results here so far. Avatar, Alan Wake 2, Cyberpunk performance mode. Yeah, we're seeing the kind of results I'd expect to see, bearing in mind that the hardware has so many similarities. But with that said, both pieces of hardware can run much slower, or indeed much faster than the other, depending on the game and the content. Now, the range of tests is admittedly very limited, but in most scenarios, the plausible ones I guess, 6700 seems to be a bit faster, in line with the specifications. However, there can be close parity too, as you're seeing here in A Plague Tale Requiem for example. There are in the second variances between PS5 and 6700, but across the run of the benchmark sequence, both deliver an identical 36.5 FPS average. Now, will it stay like that in the games to come in the future? The longer a console generation persists, the more developers manage to squeeze from fixed platforms in a way that doesn't really translate to PC. I mean, here's Modern Warfare 2 running on a base PS4. This is essentially a GPU akin to an old Radeon 7850 or 7870 with more RAM and a couple more async compute pipelines. And yet I warrant that an equivalent PC part wouldn't get anything near this. I mean, I've spoken to the Infinity Ward tech director. Some of the low-level stuff they're doing with the PS4 GPU here, including a phenomenal software implementation of variable rate shading. This is hardcore stuff that just couldn't transfer across over to PC. But equally, lack of driver support and the general upward trend in performance on PC parts across the years effectively consigns these old console equivalent GPUs to the scrap heap. Or else you're looking at older GPUs that do share hardware commonalities with console equivalents performing a good deal worse. What you've been watching here is God of War on the base PlayStation 4 stacked up against the R9 270X, built on the same architecture but featuring 2 extra compute units compared to the PS4. It's a DX11 port, so not tapping into asynchronous compute, but even so a very similar GPU is way off pace in this example. Okay then, I really am trying to wrap this one up, but this is another one of those rabbit holes I tend to find myself getting trapped in. But this has been an interesting exercise all told, and a chance to see how adaptable, affordable PC GPUs can be, viewed through the lens of optimized and console equivalent settings. All of which means we've come to the end of this video, so yeah, the usual outro stuff applies. Like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed the content, consider bell ringing for whatever notifications may or may not come your way. Please do think about joining us on the DF supporter program. I mean, you know the score by now. High quality video downloads, early access to DF Direct Weekly, bonus material, access to our amazing community. It's all good stuff. And as always, store.digitalfoundry.net. It's a wondrous portal to our various merchandising wares. But that's all from me on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.